Welcome to the American Citizens Abroad podcast. I'm Michelle, and today I'm chatting with Diane, the force behind the Living Abroad lifestyle blog and YouTube channel, We in France. Welcome, Diane. Thanks for chatting with us today.
Hi there, Michelle. Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Pleasure to be here.
We're happy to have you. Could you share with us how France became your new home, and have you lived in any other countries?
So first, no, I have never lived in any other countries except the United States, in New York and New Jersey, where I went to college. How did I come to France? How did I get here? The short answer is because I married a French guy named Thomas. But basically, if we take it back to when I graduated college, I was living in New York City. I got a corporate job. And after a couple of years of that, I started questioning what else is there in life. I would come home exhausted, without much mental capacity for anything else. It was a demanding job. I would just ask myself, what else is out there? Is this all there is to life? It was just a drag. And I thought, gosh, is this going to be my life? Like moving up the career ladder in an unfulfilling job with no time for anything else till I retire. I wanted more. I started doing things for myself. I took tennis lessons. And one of the other things I did, I started taking French lessons in a place in Montclair, New Jersey, where I'm from. Not Montclair, I'm from New Jersey, called Alliance Française. They are a wonderful French language school. They have branches in New York City, all around in Paris as well. And I started doing that for fun. Moving to France wasn't even on my radar. I had not met my now French husband, Tom. And I took French classes just to kind of work my brain in another way, just fun things to distract me from how unhappy I was at my job. And one thing led to another, and I started to hear about this program. It's an acronym, TAPIF, Teaching Abroad Program in France. And it was a program for young Americans to legally move to France and to get paid by teaching French kids in the public school system English. So I applied for this program on a whim. I had no background in French except from the funny high school French we learn. And everyone's like, bonjour, je m'appelle Diane, like terrible accents. I applied for that program and waited, continuing taking my French lessons. During the summer, Tom actually had just gone through a breakup. I met him in New York City when he was on vacation. And I told him I just got accepted to this teaching program in France. And it was in the Paris area. I was in a suburb outside of Paris. Tom lived out where we live now, actually, in the Loire Valley, Western France. He was my lifeline. After he vacationed in the US, we weren't a couple, nothing like that. But when I moved to France, he was the only French person I knew, and he became my lifeline and was my only friend there at first. One thing turned into another, and he helped me open my bank account, all the things that you have to do. And we realized, hey, I think we actually like each other. So we started dating. After a couple of years doing long distance, because after that teaching program, I went back to the US, we decided, hey, let's get married. And we did. And then I moved to France in 2012, and that's where I currently live.
What has surprised you most about French culture?
Oh my gosh, I think we could probably talk for an hour on that topic alone. There are a lot of things that I would just chalk up to like funny little cultural differences. You could find those out very easily. Just Google cultural differences between the US and France. So I'm going to skip over those because it's just very cliche. But I would say one of the biggest things that surprised me in a good way is that French people are not like the negative stereotypes that everyone seems to believe. The French are rude. The French are arrogant. The French look down on Americans. They're judgmental. You probably heard these stereotypes about the French. And I had too. I had a friend of mine who was a flight attendant. So she would come to Paris a lot. And she knew a lot of French people. And she said, oh, Diane, she was very jaded. And she said, good luck there. Good luck meeting a guy. They're all a certain way. And French people are so arrogant. And all these things got into my head, right? And it was very easy now looking back when I meet people through my blog or YouTube channel who still live in the US, I have to dispel stereotypes because people believe this stuff. And now I'm like, wow, how could anyone believe that? But I believe that stuff because shows like Emily in Paris, well, that wasn't available back in the day. People think all French people are this class of people of upper middle class, white, beautiful little cookie cutter molds of people who love good wine and know how to cook and shop at the market and do all that. And yes, some people are like that, but there's a much broader spectrum and variety of people who are very diverse, all skin colors, backgrounds, body types, socioeconomic statuses. And it's a beautiful thing because French people are so much more than the negative stereotypes that are so pervasive out there. Just one thing that really surprised me because I showed up kind of intimidated. Are they going to look down on me because I'm American? Or will people think I'm a weirdo because I'm a foreigner? Or just stuff like that. And I was pleasantly surprised that the vast majority of French people, yeah, there are a few bad apples out there, but that's the case anywhere. I was pleasantly surprised overall in that the majority of the negative stereotypes, they are not true 99% of the time. And kind of with that, not everyone fits into a box. And I think that goes along with what I just said. We see things on TV or in movies, and it always paints the French in like a really good, high class, very elegant, classy light. And if you're someone who's maybe not into high fashion, I mentioned Emily in Paris again, you might come to France thinking, oh gosh, if I don't wear heels on the cobblestones every day or have designer fashion, am I going to fit in? And my answer is yes, you're going to fit in. There are French people all over, maybe less so in Paris, just like in New York City, it's a little more higher end in terms of how people dress and present themselves. If you're out in the countryside where I live, yes, people wear sneakers, they wear shorts in the summer. People don't look like they stepped out of a fashion magazine. French people are not a monolith, I guess, is what I'm trying to say. Everyone's not a certain way. It's really been an amazing process, kind of getting to know different French people for who they are and not that preconceived notion of a kind of a stereotypical box that we can sometimes fall into the trap of putting people in.
I know one thing you like to cover in your blog is the reality of living in France versus the fantasy. What are some of the challenges you have faced while living in France that may be surprising to some?
Gosh, one that kind of smacks me in the face that I guess I'll lead with is during the pandemic, things were hard for everyone around the globe. But something that made it even more difficult for me is that my mom was dying of cancer. She's since passed away, but it got really bad in 2021. The problem is just there was a gray area in France about who could get vaccines and when and where. It was very difficult for me to leave France with all the changing rules. I didn't want to put my mom in danger, expose her to COVID. So just getting on a plane and being exposed to other people during that time was a really difficult decision for me. And then also, I couldn't leave France unless I was vaccinated if I wanted to come back. So long story short, I was able to leave France and to be with my mom when she passed away, something I'll be grateful for that I was able to be there. But just with the rules during the pandemic and the bureaucracy of it all, it added stress to an already very stressful time, which kind of leads into grief in general. One of the things that I find challenging, I've been in France now for a little over a decade, is just everyday life problems that all human beings face. If we're lucky to be alive long enough, we're going to come up against struggles and challenges, whether it's our health, someone's health that we love, financial issues, marriage issues, addiction, whatever, you name it. That's life. That's a human thing. When you're already dealing with something difficult, and then you have to do it in a new culture, in my case, in a new language, it just adds a level of difficulty to something that's already very difficult. So I would say with grief, it was difficult just having to figure out the logistics of getting back home. I also lost some other loved ones during that time as well. So it was just one blow after another. And I think people sometimes underestimate how difficult it could be living abroad when life gets hard and then just navigating that in a culture that's not familiar. I know for me personally, when I don't feel great, I want comfort. I want something sentimental and something stupid like turning on the TV. Now we have Netflix and all that, but turning on the TV, first few years in France, maybe your French isn't great. Or even if it is, you just want to hear something familiar, or you just want to be able to talk to someone in your language, or go to a store and get your favorite hot chocolate and marshmallows. Just something to comfort you. And sometimes it could feel like the exact opposite of that when you're already going through something difficult. Just that added stress of a different culture and language. Yeah, I think the paperwork, just the bureaucracy in general for administrative tasks like visas or residency card renewals, that could be a pain in the butt. Also related to doctors, sometimes there are long waits for a specialist. A dermatologist in my area might run you 8 months to a year getting an appointment. If you're a new patient for the dentist, that could also be long. I don't want to paint the whole system like that. Of course, there are many areas of France where you can get an appointment for a specialist very quickly, but that's not the case everywhere, especially when you're in medical desert, which is kind of where I am. A lot of doctors have retired, and then there's a shortage of new doctors who want to set up shop outside of big cities. So wait times can be long, and that could be challenging when you need someone to take a look at you. Yeah, so there are a lot of little things that Americans have to get used to, but I would be lying if I said it wasn't frustrating because it seems like tradesmen, this has happened with plumbers, roofers, they're a little more reticent to move quickly and get things done in the same way that maybe we're used to back home. So it's all an adjustment, and the pros definitely outweigh the cons, but those things can really get under your skin.
In one of your blog posts, you mentioned how culture shock can sneak up on someone when least expected and can be related to ingrained aspects of French culture. And this culture shock can impact connecting to people and establishing oneself in the culture. Can you speak more about this?
Yeah, this is a big one. And this is something that I didn't notice right away. Meaning my first 2 or 3 years in France, it's something I kind of looked at and would look back on and say, yeah, that's what's going on here. So it's a pretty big topic. So I'll just give you some of the highlights. Small talk, for example. There are these little cultural differences. The French don't do small talk as much as maybe we would in the United States. That's not to say French people are cold or they won't strike up conversation. They will. It's nuanced. And I actually have a whole blog and YouTube video about this. If you go to weinfrance.com, you could just search small talk. It'll come right up because I have a lot to say about this. It ties into what the French consider your private sphere versus the public sphere. And if you don't really understand what this is, because I didn't for the first few years, you might think French people are being rude or cold or they don't care about you. So to give you an example, I would go to the pharmacy with my little dog who required a medication. So I was there pretty regularly, and I got to know my neighborhood pharmacist, and he was a man at the time in his 50s, very nice and all that. So one day he told me he wouldn't be there the next week. He was going on vacation. I was like, oh, great. Where are you going? And he kind of looked at me and he answered, but the answer was kind of short. He's like, oh, I'm going to Brittany. I'm like, oh, wow, with your family? Or are you going to be staying at a hotel, beachfront, or is it more inland? Just asking questions about his trip because he seemed excited to be going. And I was happy to ask some questions. And he answered the questions, but not that well, not that thoroughly. Then a few weeks later, I actually was going away. And I told him, yeah, I just got back from vacation to see my family in the US, something like that. And he didn't ask me one thing about it. And I got home to my husband and was like, I had asked him about his vacation and really took an interest in him. I told him that I had just been on vacation. He didn't ask me a thing. Do you think that's kind of rude? What's the deal? This is someone I knew at that point. My husband was like, no, he's just being respectful of your private sphere. You're his customer. You're not his friend. You're not buddy-buddy. It's not an equal relationship. You're there buying a product of his and he's providing a service. He's just being respectful of your private life and not wanting to pry. And my husband said, by you asking those questions about his life, it's not rude, but it's maybe more unusual. Maybe a French person wouldn't really ask, oh, where are you going with your family? Are you staying in a hotel? Blah, blah, blah. And for me, that was just normal. In France, especially in maybe a little bit more formal business relationships, people will kind of leave you alone. Just to contrast this, I was in Target in the United States in Florida, where my family lives. I was waiting in line. The lady in front of me liked my shoes. She turned around and she's like, oh my gosh, I love those flip-flops. Where did you get them? And I said, oh, thank you so much. I think I don't know, got them at the mall. And we just had a little back and forth. And that's totally normal. But in France, if you start talking to someone in line, you start complimenting them on something they're wearing, it's not rude, but it might be seen as unusual. And sure, some people are going to love that. They're happy to talk to you. They're chatterboxes. But most of the time when you're in line somewhere or you have more of a formal, less close relationship with someone, by not making small talk and by not giving compliments, you're actually respecting their private sphere. It's caught me off guard a bit because while I'm not an overly smiley, bubbly American, we do learn certain social norms, social conventions, and small talk kind of comes naturally to me. So that was something I had to learn. Also, when I was going to a certain class at my gym, there was a woman I would always see, and I loved her leggings. At the time, like most people just wore black leggings, and she was cool. She had these really bright purple and pink leggings. And I told her one day, I said, oh my gosh, I love your leggings. I think they're great. She kind of looked at me with these big eyes and recoiled her head almost like, what did you say to me? If someone was watching this from afar, they probably would have looked at me and thought maybe I just insulted one of her kids or something, because the look on her face was almost like shock and horror. You would think I told her she had a big butt or something. It wasn't my French. I literally just said, I like your leggings, but it caught her off guard. She smiled and said, thank you. It's like an unusual thing. And any French people or people familiar with French culture listening, they might say, but no, you can compliment French people. Sure, you absolutely can. And I do. It's just maybe a little more unusual to do. And I'm not talking about friends or family. I'm talking about people you don't really know very well, or people in a more professional, formal context. There's definitely more of a division between the private and public sphere, even to the point where when my husband, and actually now me, when I go back to the US, we go to the grocery store Publix where my dad lives, and you go up to the cashier. And in France, you would just say bonjour, just say hello, and that's it. But in Publix, the cashier totally caught my husband off guard and said, hi, how you doing? He's like, fine, thanks. How are you? And she's like, did you find everything you were looking for? And he's like, yeah, thank you. And she's like, so what are you guys up to today? You going to the beach? And Tom looks at me and is like, what the heck is she asking? Like, he just found it very unusual, because in France, a cashier would never strike up a conversation with a complete stranger. Are you going to the beach today? Beautiful weather. I'll never say never, but it was just unusual. It wasn't just let's quietly scan the groceries and get out. It was like a whole thing about the beach and what you're doing. And then she heard his accent and he said he's French. And she said, oh, I want to go to Paris. And it was like a 10-minute back and forth. And that's way less common in France. Just things like that. And if you're not aware of this public versus private sphere difference, just in how people communicate socially, it can make you think either one, people don't like you, or two, which is maybe worse, that people are rude. And then it goes back to, I think, one of the first questions you asked me, Michelle, what surprised you about your life in France or French people? And the thing is, French people aren't rude, but if you're not familiar with the cultural norms here, things might be perceived as rude. And the thing is, no one's right or wrong. They're just cultural differences. And something that I really try to hit home on my blog and YouTube channel is to just know about these cultural differences. If you're going to travel abroad or even live somewhere, educate yourself, learn about these differences so you can be more prepared. Because I think the worst thing is to go into a situation where you have no idea about anything, and then you make judgments and you misinterpret what's going on because of your cultural lens and where you're coming from. Just kind of, I guess, the more informed we could be as citizens in general, the better it is, especially when we're traveling and interacting with people that don't speak our mother tongue, or even if they do, just are from a different country, Americans versus British citizens, Australians. And something else I'll mention that I just thought of about social norms. Americans get, I guess, a reputation sometimes for being very half glass full, very positive, very bubbly, very smiley. And a lot of times in France, if you're smiling a lot and you're overly outgoing and just very bubbly and smiley, it can almost put French people off. I've seen that happen. Again, I'm not an overly bubbly, smiley person. That's just not how I present myself. But I've seen friends who maybe have a different personality type, and French people almost see that as suspicious. Not that you're an idiot, but it's like, what is this person hiding? Why are they so smiley and bubbly? We haven't even talked yet. Like, why are they so happy? It almost comes across as suspicious. So something I do, this might sound crazy to people listening, but I know there's someone out there who lives abroad who can relate. So I'm going to say it anyway for you, for the one listener who gets it. When we show up as a newcomer somewhere, we don't really know anything yet. We're not very good at the language. We don't know the culture. We're still settling into life, and we could be a little insecure or self-conscious. So I have kind of turned up the notch on my American friendliness and my American smiliness, even though that's not my default. I'll go up to people and be very bubbly and smiley just because I'm trying to kind of cover the fact that, oh, I'm a foreigner, please like me. Or, oh, maybe you won't notice my accent and ask me where I'm from, or notice the mistake I just made conjugating the past tense, or something like that, almost as a way to put people at ease. But the thing is, it can backfire in France, because if you are overly smiley or bubbly, as I said, that can look kind of suspicious, or like, someone even told me that it could seem deranged, when someone is really, really bubbly. My advice would be, if you come to France and you are one of those people that's very smiley and friendly like that, just tone it down a little. One other thing that I guess kind of an ingrained aspect of French culture that left me feeling I was going home empty handed a lot of times when I would try to get things done administratively is that no sometimes means yes. So, something that French people joke about is if you, I don't know, go into an office, you need something done for your visa, you ask, oh, do you think I can get this done today? Blah, blah, blah. They'll say, ah, no, ce n'est pas possible. No, it's not possible. That's always the default. No, it's not possible. For whatever reason, you don't have enough copies. And even though there's a copy machine behind them and it could easily make you one more copy, the answer is no, we can't do that for you. Can I use the restroom? Nope, nope, nope. Can't do it. No, no, no. And in the beginning, I would just take it at face value, hear the no, and then go home. And I would tell my husband, oh, I wasn't able to do this or that today. And he said, well, but did you ask again? I said, no, I didn't ask again. No means no. And he's like, no, in some cases, no means yes. You have to ask again. There's a great book called The Art of Persuasion, and it's a great lesson in how to, respectfully, of course, you don't want to be pushy or be rude, but to kind of artfully ask someone to suggest something that's kind of their idea, but it was really your idea, to get them to turn the no into a yes. I could give you a silly example where the copy machine thing, there was literally a working copy machine behind the woman when I needed to submit my dossier for a residency card renewal. I guess the website wasn't updated. So I had 3 copies. The French love paperwork. I had 3 copies. That's what the website said. That's what I did. And I showed up for my appointment a month later. And the woman told me, no, 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 madam, it's not possible. You need 4 copies. We'll have to make you another appointment 3 months from now. And I said, come on, let's be reasonable about this. Can I just go make a copy down the street? Or better yet, there's a copy machine right behind you that you just used. I saw you. She said, no, it's not possible. And then I kind of finessed it. Again, not being pushy. I'm not advocating that we act pushy or rude, try to be that kind of person. That's not what I'm saying at all. It's kind of an art of still maintaining respect, being friendly, and above all, being respectful. But you just ask again, you ask it differently. And sometimes that works when you're trying to make an appointment at a doctor and the secretary tells you there's no availability. If you gently push a little bit, you explain that you don't have your car next week, it's in the shop, and your dog was sick and you really don't feel well. And if there's any possibility at all, if a cancellation comes up, you would really appreciate it. And that works. The lesson there is learn how to finesse things, again, respectfully, but in a way so that the answer actually is yes, because it's not possible doesn't always mean literally it's not possible. You have to ask again.
Are there any things that you can get away with in France that you wouldn't be able to in the US?
As a foreigner, most people, when they move abroad as an adult, if they've learned the language as an adult, they're going to speak with an accent. That is an amazing thing. I have a blog post all about why I think it's cool to speak with an accent. But the thing is, you can play dumb. If you make a cultural misstep or you do something silly, you can just pretend you do not speak the language, in my case, French. So what happens here where I live, my house is right off the street, so people can knock directly on my door. And there are a lot of solicitors, people who come to the door selling potatoes, knives, brioche, bread, everything you could think of under the sun. And this was something in my suburban life growing up did not happen. Aside from trick-or-treaters or UPS guys, no one would ring the doorbell trying to sell something. So this was something I was not used to at all. I learned that some of these people can be scammers, that it actually happened to a neighbor who was robbed down the street. Someone came to the door under the guise of selling potatoes or some other produce. And they really weren't selling potatoes. They were trying to case her house to see what was in there that they could see, that they could steal, seeing if she had a TV, if they could see she had her laptop out, if it looked like it was decorated nicely. So I knew about these scams. So whenever someone comes to the door trying to persuade us to change our energy company, I just pretend I don't speak French. I stumble through it and I say, oh, I just arrived in France. Yeah, a decade ago, but they don't know that. I just arrived in France. Sorry, I don't understand. No, I don't need knives. And they just walk away because contrary to the popular belief, French people really don't speak fluent or even conversational English. Yes, people in hospitality and tourism do. Of course, there are people who speak English for whatever reason, but the average everyday French people, especially I would say people even an older generation, they really don't, especially once you get into smaller towns beyond basic words. So it actually works to my advantage because I don't get sold knives or potatoes that I don't need, and I also don't get scammed. So that could be used in a lot of instances. People coming to the door, people approaching you on the street who are drunk and trying to get your attention, just anything. You could just use your accent to your advantage and just start speaking in English. But I would say if we were to turn to things I get away with because of cultural differences, one thing that really surprised me was that the speed limits here on the French highway systems, they're called autoroutes, the speed limit is 130 kilometers per hour, which is about 80, 81 miles per hour. And where I grew up in New Jersey, 65, 55 and 65 miles. That's a world away from 81. So it always feels like you're going really fast here, but it helps. You get to where you want to go a little bit more quickly. So I would say that. Something else which really surprised me, although it doesn't really affect me because I'm self-employed, I work for myself from my house. If you were to work at an office with coworkers, wine at lunch is totally fine. And I know if I pulled that at one of my corporate meetings in New York City, the company I work for, I probably would have been spoken to if I had had 2 glasses of wine at lunch. But here in France, mealtime is something that's quite sacred. It's something I really enjoy about the culture, that there's attention given to meal times. It's not just a place to get your energy and your fuel. It's a place to disconnect. It's a time to be with family, to have a social event or whatever. Wine is part of French culture. And if you have a glass with your colleagues at work, that is fine. No one's going to say anything or give you the side eye, and your boss is definitely not going to say anything to you. But that said, of course, do not drink the whole bottle, but a glass or two at lunch is fine. And that surprised me. In New Jersey and New York, you could not have an open container. That might be nationwide. You couldn't have an open container of alcohol in public. So if you went to a liquor store and you bought a can of beer, you would have to put it, the whole joke, you put it in one of those paper bags so people think you're drinking a Coke, but everyone knows it's a beer. Here, you don't need to put it in a paper bag or wait till you get to a restaurant. You can have a picnic in the park with an open bottle of wine. You can literally walk down the street with an open bottle of wine and drink it. I think most people probably just do the picnic thing. They're not walking down the street with an open bottle of wine and chugging it, but you could potentially. It's not illegal. What is illegal is public, disorderly, and drunk conduct. So if you're stumbling all over, making a fool out of yourself, harassing people, obviously that's not going to fly. But you can absolutely have an open container in public and have a picnic. So that was definitely something that I saw that was different. I would also say one of the best things I think here, maybe I should have led with this, is that you can take a long vacation in France to really rest and recharge, and your job status isn't going to be in jeopardy. And what I mean by that is when I was working at my corporate job in New York City, I actually booked a 2-week vacation to New Zealand. It was a great fare. It came up late one night. I did not ask my boss ahead of time if I could use my vacation to take a 2-week trip, but I had accrued the PTO. So I thought everything was cool. It wasn't a busy time. And I booked the trip. And when I told him that I would be gone for 10 business days, I almost got fired and put on a performance improvement plan because there was no way that I could use the 2 weeks. And I said, but I have the vacation time. And he said, well, I'm going to have to grant you special vacation. We take 1 week at a time. And I was very early in my career. It was just a huge contrast because when I came to France, every full-time employee, and I think part-time too, they get 5 weeks of paid vacation. And that doesn't include sick time. It's not like a bank of PTO, how some employers do it in the US that includes sick and vacation and personal time. It's 5 weeks of vacation time that people are expected to use. So whether you work a minimum wage job, whether you work for a big corporation, it's not a perk of being employed by a good employer. Vacation time is federally mandated. Everyone in France gets this. And that was something that really stood in sharp contrast to how we do things in the US. A lot of jobs barely get 2 weeks of vacation, and you take it in summer, you take it Christmas time, and that's about it. Something I really love about France is that people are expected to use this vacation. And often people will go away for 2, even 3 weeks in the summer to really get away. And you know what? The companies still function. Everything's fine. It's not such a big focus on money and maximizing everyone to their fullest potential all the time to their detriment, which is something that kind of made me hate my job in the US. And that's not a dig on the US about people who hate their jobs or anything like that. But I do think that having 5 weeks of paid vacation is an amazing thing. And I see it firsthand every day here in France. I wish everyone had that.
What are some things you miss from or about the US that you can't get in France?
First and foremost, the most cliche answer I could give you, family and friends. Living your best life here, but you want to be there. And then when you're there, you want to be here. You just can't win, whether you live across your state, across your own country, or in my case, across an ocean. It's something where you just want everyone to be closer. That's not an isolated thing to France. One thing that is, you can't really get amazing pizza in France. Living in New York City, I was spoiled. We had amazing, amazing pizza places. The pizza style here is a little bit different, and it's not really to my taste. So I always look forward to having some quality New York pizza when I'm back in the US. In France, we have amazing supermarkets. There's a lot of really good ones, but there's nothing that's exactly the equivalent of Trader Joe's or the newer one, Sprouts, that I really enjoy going to in New Jersey. It's just they have great hours, they have great produce. And that might sound silly to someone listening who's like, oh, but you have all the markets in France. Yeah, and we do. We do have those. But what I said earlier about something that just feels comforting and familiar, and it's not necessarily about the products they have, but it's just something that reminds you of home. And sometimes when I felt homesick or longing, there are little things like that, little stores or restaurants or foods where it kind of feels like a warm hug. Those kinds of things. Even Target. There are stores here that have everything you could possibly need, but there's something about the products that you're familiar with or food item that reminds you of your childhood. And it's just different, but you learn to find things you love abroad as well. And then when you're back in the US, you miss those things. And in my case, that's like amazing local wine and bread. It goes both ways for sure. I would also say, while I'm a huge hater of toxic positivity, I think that's so damaging. I do think there's something to be said for having a can-do attitude where the glass is half full and we kind of approach problems from a way where we know we're going to find the solution. We just need to figure out how, instead of kind of approaching a problem from I'm not sure we could do this. Let me list all the reasons why we shouldn't do this. It's just an approach that comes at things from an angle that maybe I wasn't used to. It's just a different vibe in France sometimes. I would also say something I really miss, and as I'm telling you this, I'm looking out my window. I really miss screened windows. The one big thing that they prevent are bugs from getting in. And I am someone who is highly reactive to any type of insect bite, spiders and all that. I find them regularly on my walls here, my white walls, big black spiders, depending on the season. Yeah, screens are just not the default for windows in France and actually many parts of Europe. Well, they do have DIY kits at some hardware stores. They don't really work that well and they don't always look great. And it's just a cultural difference. My windows, they all open inward toward me. They're tall vertical windows that have a handle and they open in two panels completely toward you, inward into your house. And on the outside of these windows, French homes have shutters. They're called les volets. And these shutters can be manual or they can be opened and closed with a rod. They kind of look like hurricane shutters for anyone in Florida. And they get opened and lowered every morning and every night. They serve as security, privacy, temperature control. When it's really hot in the summer, it helps keep the cool air inside. And you also sit in the dark. But what I'm getting at is if we had a screen on our windows, in order to open and close the shutters, you would need to move the screen to the side. And guess what? In the 10 seconds you do that, the bugs come in. So we haven't really found a solution that one lets us open and close our shutters and two keeps the bugs out. I guess we would have to change all our shutters to the ones that are remote control so they don't actually manually involve us reaching our hand out the window. That's been a challenge. Oh, the bugs that come in, it's the stuff of nightmares, really. Something else that I thought of while I was speaking, I really miss large parking spaces. And I say this as a confident driver. I'm not a nervous driver by any means. And we don't have a particularly big car. But even that said, French parking garages and the parking spaces you'll find inside, even ones in outdoor parking lots, they tend to be, I should really measure them, but they seem to be a little smaller than what we're used to in the US. It makes sense. A lot of cars in the US are bigger. You might think, oh, but all the cars in France are smaller. No, that's not true. There's still SUVs. There are still very large sedans. Yes, most cars are smaller than the average US car, but even still, kind of trying to wiggle into one of those parking spaces. Thank goodness cars these days have like the little beep, beep, beep that lets you know when your front is getting close to something else. It can be really hairy navigating these garages. And I just hold my breath. I hear the beeping and say a prayer and please let us get into the space. And you'll notice the posts, they have so many scratches. It's like a rainbow of paint smudges and dents and all that. This is a problem when most people cannot park in one fell swoop. You have to kind of go in, back up, go in, back up. And then after three back and forths, you get into the space. And it's really hard when there's a car on either side that kind of park too close to the line, because then that even gives you less space to deal with.
What is the American expat community like where you live? Who is it composed of?
Where I live, there is no American expat community. As I said, I live in Western France, kind of by Nantes. I'm in a smaller town. I would be really surprised if there are more than like five other foreigners here. So there's no expat events or anything like that. That's, of course, very different than a big city like Paris. There's a huge community. I will say that some of the bigger French towns, they have sports teams that are composed of athletes, international athletes. So you'll find people from Canada and the US, and they usually come for the season for their sport, like hockey or basketball. Their spouses come with them. The few Americans that I've met, they've been wives or girlfriends of the athletes, but they're here for usually less than a year and they leave. So it's very transient. I haven't met that many people that are like me, that are kind of here for the long haul. I would also say the only Americans I've met in my town would be Mormons, Mormon missionaries. I would usually find them when I would walk my dog, who's since passed away, out in the park. I was out multiple times a day, and the Mormon missionaries would be in pairs, either two guys or two girls, usually between like 18 and 22. So young Americans, and they were stationed in my town because there was a Mormon church, and their job was to talk to people and to share their religion. And I'm not religious at all, more spiritual, but not religious. But I was just so happy to have some native English speakers that I even went to the Mormon church just for the social aspect, which is funny if you know me in real life. So I wouldn't really call that an expat community, but there are people that I've met over the years that kind of fall into those categories. Thinking about what I just said, like, oh, well, maybe that's lonely, but it's really not, because then you have more of an opportunity to meet French people, like at my gym. That's where I made my friends. It was either I would befriend senior citizens who are also out at 10 a.m. walking their animals, which was great because they have time to talk and they're patient and they're happy to chat. They're not in a rush. And then also at the gym, like I said, I think sometimes when people kind of cling to their community, you can live in a bubble, and it's this effect where you kind of stay with people who are just like you, which isn't a bad thing in and of itself, but I think it can be sometimes when we don't continue to put ourselves out there. I just said I went to a Mormon church. Doesn't get more putting yourself out there than that for me, going to a church, and especially a religion I wasn't a part of. I think it's important sometimes to always try new opportunities and to do new things, new to you things, and just try to push yourself in that way, because you never know what kind of language learning opportunity you're going to come across. And even if that's events within the expat community, put yourself out there, try new things, because you never know who you'll meet or what you'll do. It could all be really positive. So whether you're in a small town like me and you don't really have other people from your home country, or you meet locals, just do stuff, get out there, especially your first couple of years. It'll really help, I found.
And from your own experience, how has living abroad changed you?
This is a huge question. And I think if you asked me before my mom died, I'd have a different answer. If you asked me a decade ago, I'd have a different answer. And I think some of that is just about maturity in general. I was in my 20s when I moved to France. Now I have a lot more life experience. So is it France? Is it the maturity? Is it just going through life? I don't know. But I will say one thing that has impacted me, and I'll get into a few specifics in a second, is just having my blog and YouTube channel, because it's created a community of people who are either Francophiles, are interested in maybe moving to France, maybe other foreigners who live abroad. And it's been a lifeline for me. It started as a hobby and grew into something more. I appreciate my community so much. Friends that I have, actual like really good friends, they're people who I've connected with via my blog and YouTube channel. So if I never had the courage to start that kind of thing, I don't think I'd be where I am now in terms of my professional side, but also just in terms of how I've evolved as a person. Because people who contact me through my blog, some are Americans, some are other nationalities, some are French people who actually enjoy what I do, and they kind of see the flip side. Maybe they live in the US, or they just don't know much about how we do things in the United States, and they just see the differences that I see in their culture, and then by default they know how things are in the US. So it's kind of seeing myself and seeing them. I think the blog and YouTube channel has absolutely changed a lot about how I do things. And one of those things that I'll highlight is it's made me more aware of my own country's shortcomings and also our strengths. Not to get too deep into this, but I think a lot of Americans are educated from a young age. I mean, do we still say the Pledge of Allegiance in schools? I don't know. I'm kind of far removed from that. I don't have kids. I never question that. I'm like, why do we put our hand on our heart and say the Pledge of Allegiance? Someone could see that and think, oh, that's kind of strange. But it was normal to me. It was normal to think the United States is the best country in the world. I don't use words like best anymore. There's no best. France isn't superior to the US across the board. The United States isn't superior to every other country. There are pros and cons, there are differences. And I think we'll become a better society if we can learn from those differences and respect them and just be more empathetic overall to people who are especially different than us. I think the best way to see something is to get distance from it, to get space. And the way that I've kind of come to that is moving to France. Not on purpose, not because I wanted to get away from the US, but because I fell in love with a man who is French and we decided to start our life here. You can kind of look at our own stereotypes and our own ways of doing things and just cultural mores and all of that. You can really examine them from a more neutral point of view when you're living in a different culture and can see things from a distance. Of course, we'll never be unbiased. We are who we are. But I think it's really given me a lot of pause and just time to see how the ways we were doing things growing up, just how we look at them now as we go through life. And really open my eyes to how other people live in France and beyond. Like I said, a lot of people who are part of my blog community on We in France are British. And I've become accustomed to a variety of different accents from the UK, Welsh, Scottish, and it's beautiful. Even something as silly as English spelling, right? People leave comments on my blog or YouTube. And the first time that someone spelled enrollment with one L, I thought it was a typo. I didn't tell them that. And then I realized, okay, some people who English is their mother tongue, I'm even learning about my own native language is what I'm saying. Spelled. I knew the basic ones like color will have a U in Canada and different places outside the United States, just becoming more open-minded to how things are done elsewhere and to always remember it's not better, it's not worse. The US doesn't do everything right and everywhere else is wrong. That's not the takeaway. The takeaway is things are different and we can learn, and it's best to kind of keep your eyes open, but not judge, just to be aware. I would also say living abroad has made me question some of my relationships. I would say this isn't like the most positive one. I think there are a lot of fair-weathered friends out there that maintain contact when it's easy for them, maybe when they're getting something from it. I had a friend who she would always have me walk her dog during the day because my work schedule allowed that. And she would call me up and, oh, can you walk the dog today? And then I realized when I moved abroad that our friendship was maybe more one-sided. Not that she was using me, but it was situational. I was useful to her when I could walk her dog. Beyond that, I wasn't really worth staying in contact with. And there's been lots of experiences like that where the distance between you kind of puts I don't want to say a wedge, but it can really change the nature of a friendship or a relationship. And of course, it's a two-way street. The one who lives far away or the one who moves has to make an effort too. It's not one way by any means. When that effort's not reciprocated, it's not equal. That can be a really hard pill to swallow when you realize, maybe that relationship didn't mean as much to them as I thought it did. And that can really, really hurt. I've been through that a lot. Something else that's changed me, just living abroad, is how I deal with stress and manage conflict and challenge. I would say the surface level stuff was what I would deal with the first few years here, stuff that I mentioned. The cultural differences, the little annoyances of places being closed Sunday and not doing my grocery shopping till Sunday and realizing, oop, I can't get everything I need for the week now. Just stupid stuff that now they're not even annoyances. It's just real life. But I would say when grief hit, when my mom started getting really sick and I wasn't there, cancer, I hope cancer just dies and is eradicated from the earth sooner rather than later. It's just a horrible thing. I think when you're dealing with grief and horrible illness, it really shows you who you are, not just to yourself, but to other people. And living here, as I said, being away and just working through regular life things in a different language and culture, you really look at yourself and say, okay, I need to do better with this and this, how I manage conflict and how I take care of myself during that time. It's kind of been a blessing in a way because you learn what you're made of and your strengths and just everything that you need to do to kind of be the best version of yourself despite everything. going on around you. And also, I think maybe the most important is that I've become less judgmental. I think when we're 20 years old, we're in college, we think we know everything. We know better than everyone about everything. I wasn't really like that, but I was way more judgmental, I would say, in my early 20s. And then again, I don't know if it's maturity or just seeing different things and being exposed to more. I kind of have come to the conclusion that everyone is just doing the best they can. They're doing the best for themselves, their families, and trying to get by. And that people who experience different life issues, they're not there to be judged. They're not there for us to look down on. They're there to be supported. Something that I'm a huge proponent of is just being empathetic to people we know and especially people we don't, and try to put ourselves in their shoes and to look at things in their eyes. And I think that's really missing from the world right now. We really need more empathy and just care. So yeah, so I think I've become like, I cry at movies now. I just think I've become less judgmental overall and just look at things a lot more open-mindedly and balanced. And that is most definitely a good thing.
And for those thinking about moving to France, what top tips would you like to give them?
Oh gosh, so many. Number one, first and foremost, learn French. Not tomorrow, not the next day, now, yesterday, if you can go back in time. Start learning French, because when I came to France, I told you I was taking classes at the Alliance Française, and I thought, on paper, I was an intermediate level. I'm like, that's good. That's a good starting place. I'll pick it up. Well, let me tell you, French is not osmosis. You will not just pick it up. That might work for a 5-year-old, but you're not going to learn grammar. You're not going to learn the reasons why things that they are the way they are. You might speak a very, very broken French or like conversational French, but to really learn the language, you're going to have to study. You're going to have to put work into it. It's an effort for sure. And it takes time, years. So the best thing you can do is start learning now. And something I wrote about on the blog is to make comprehension your focus. If you are actually moving to France and your goal is to speak to people face to face and not communicate on paper with a pigeon or something, you need to work on communication. Because as I said, I was intermediate level of French on paper. But let me tell you, when I got face to face with a French person, it was very difficult to understand the words that came out of their mouth. And if I'm being honest, for like the first 18 months, I could write down what I wanted to say. I could pronounce French reasonably well, which made people think that I was fluent in French at the time, and I was not. And what I would hear, people were talking to me, just a stupid sentence. An example, I'm going to the pool. It's je vais à la piscine. And I would hear à la piscine, the pool, but I didn't know who or what the verb was. Or I would hear je vais, I'm going, but I wouldn't hear à la piscine. So I knew someone was going somewhere, but like my brain would just hear a collection of sounds. And then I would psych myself out because I wouldn't catch the second half of the sentence. And I just felt really stupid. And it backfired because then I wouldn't want to talk to people and people thought I was shy. I'm not shy. And it was just like a really damaging cycle. So I would say learn French now and focus on comprehension. Yeah, grammar is great. Written exercises are great. Reading is fantastic. Sure. But comprehension needs to be your focus above all else if you're actually moving to France. I feel really strongly on that because I made a big mistake there. So watch shows on Netflix in French, listen to podcasts in French, try to have a French speaking partner. Now with the internet, there are so many ways to connect with French people wanting to do a language exchange. Do all that. Do not wait till you move to France to start learning French. I would also say, number two, that I constantly talk about, do your research for your move and seek out not only the good stuff, but the bad stuff. I would actually say make it your mission to seek out content that is not positive. Seek out people who decided to move home back to their home country or another country, who've left France. Seek out people who are not enjoying their time in France. And I know that's going to be harder to find because the majority of content out there is positive. People who are really not enjoying their life do not start blogs and YouTube channels about their new home. And again, people, they don't like hearing anything negative. But, I think there's a line between being negative and being real. And I really encourage you to seek out people who are being real, not to discourage you, not to be negative, not to confirm your doubts about France isn't right or whatever, not for any of those reasons. To reinforce that it's not going to be a cakewalk, to reinforce that you're going to have struggles and challenges, and to better prepare you. That's the whole premise of my blog and YouTube channel, to make you more aware and prepared and educated about what French culture is like and also what life is like here as a foreigner, So when you come, you're not going to be surprised by the things that I was surprised by, or caught off guard, or thinking the French are rude because you don't understand the public and private sphere, like how I was when I first came. Seek out that content that maybe isn't what you want to be reading on your Saturday afternoon, but content that's going to, in the long run, make you more prepared. And that's only going to serve you in the long term. That's really important to me. And anyone who paints France as a paradise where everything's perfect all the time, or any country abroad, do not listen to them. Do not only listen to them. Seek out other voices and opinions. And I would even say seek out people who are not your same demographic. So if you're of retired age, seek out college students to listen to. If you're a newly married couple, seek out a couple that's in a later stage of life, maybe retirees, maybe someone who's widowed. Because again, if we only have our own echo chamber and we only listen to people who sound and look like us and have the same life experience, you're not going to be setting yourself up for being a well-rounded, prepared foreigner abroad. Those are just my thoughts. It's something I wish I did more of. So passing that on to you. I would also say visit as much as you can. I know that's not always possible, but if you're able to spend more than just a week somewhere, visit the area. I actually get emails from people who say, "Oh, Diane, I'm in love with Emily in Paris. I want to move to France." And I'm like, okay, hold on a second. You need to visit France before you decide to move here. I mean, sometimes people do that and it works out great, but most of the time, there's going to be a lot of research needed that'll really help someone in that position. So spend as much time in France as you can. I guess the last thing I'll say on that is I would say really examine your motivations for moving to France. Because if you're moving to France to escape where you are now, I will say that problems have a funny way of following you. Maybe not the same problems, maybe not right away, but I would say work on yourself as much as possible. So you're very confident, self-assured person before you move, because like I said, problems will follow you. So if you're trying to escape something you hate in the US, I'm not sure that's the best motivation for moving abroad. Just really ask yourself, what am I looking to achieve by moving to France? And does that make sense for me long term? Because I think kind of having conversations with ourselves like that can be pretty enlightening.
Any final thoughts you'd like to share?
I would say that I have zero regrets about moving abroad. It's one of my best life decisions. It's been incredibly rewarding, and I would not change it for anything. So if you feel in your heart that you want to make a change for yourself in your life, whether that's at home or moving abroad, maybe it's something like just moving to a different place in your town, or buying a house, or even moving within your own state or country, whatever it is, if you feel something that you know to be true to you in your heart, go for it. Because if I've learned anything the past couple of years, life is so short. And if we wait until tomorrow or the best time, we'll just be waiting. And then one day we're going to wake up at 50, 60, 70, 80 years old and wonder why we never made the jump or made that change for ourselves. So has it been easy for me? Absolutely not. But would I do it again? Yes, in a heartbeat. I just want people who connect with me on my blog and YouTube to be as prepared as they can, to hopefully learn from my mistakes, and to just be a little more culturally understanding and the most empathetic version of themselves, because that's only going to benefit themselves and everyone around them. That would be my main point. And also just to be kind to yourself if you're struggling, either where you are, where you're going. Just be kind to yourself, whatever that means to you. For me, it's take time to rest, take time to work out, to eat right, to get a massage. You know what's right for you. And if you feel a pull in any one direction, do yourself the favor and explore it, because again, life is short. And I think that's something amazing to do for yourself, whether it's moving abroad or just some other life change. We need to go for it, because we only get one chance at this life thing. So that's what I have to say.
Thanks for taking the time to chat today.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was fun, Michelle. Thank you.
It was very fun. Thanks. The American Citizens Abroad podcast is a monthly podcast that is published the second Tuesday of each month. It is edited and produced by me, Michelle, and is a product of American Citizens Abroad. You can email us at podcast@americansabroad.org. Remember, give us a good rating on Apple Podcasts so other Americans living abroad can find us. The content of ACA podcasts, including documents and presentations, is made available solely for general information purposes. It is not intended and should not be treated as legal, financial, or tax advice. The views and opinions expressed do not necessarily reflect the views of American Citizens Abroad, Inc., or any affiliated organization. ACA does not warrant the accuracy, completeness, or usefulness of any content or other information. ACA disclaims all liability and responsibility arising from any reliance placed on any content or information by you or any other person. ACA is nonpartisan and does not support any political party or candidate.